Today's daf is daf Yud Gimel, and we're dealing with the nevuah of Miriam. And the Gemara here on the top of daf Yud Gimel establishes Omeres that the nevuah states Asida imi sheteled ben shemoshia es Yisrael. My mother Yocheved is destined to give birth to a son who will save the Jewish people. Kevin shenolad Moshe nismale kol habayis kulo or. The entire house was filled with light with the birth of Moshe. Amar Avia unishaka al Rosh. At this point in time, Amram is very satisfied and fully believing that the nevuah of Miriam had come to pass. And the fact that the entire house was filled with light would prove that this is the Moshiach Shem Yisrael. Amar Labiti. Your prophecy has been fulfilled. But after they couldn't hide the baby after 3 months, they put him into the Nile River. At that point, Amram became despondent and pessimistic. He sort of banged her a little bit on the head. Where is your prophecy? And if you're telling me that he's going to save the Jewish people, how is that going to happen if his life will end in the river? And she, Miriam, stationed herself at a distance. What's going to happen? What's going to transpire with the baby? What would be the end of her nevuah? Of course, she saw that her prophecy was fulfilled in the most thorough sense possible. And just 80 years after she stood from afar, watching her baby brother, she stood with the entire Jewish people at Yam Suf, after her brother had led them out of Mitzrayim. And this is something that we're going to commemorate Mirz Hashem tonight and tomorrow on Shvi Shel Pesach. Now we go back to the next part of the Mishnah. Yosef Zocha, Yosef was privileged to bury his father Yaakov. Maishna meikara dechsiv. Initially, when the Torah describes the groups going into Eretz Canaan for the purpose of burying Yaakov, there's a stira between two psukim in terms of the sequence with regard to the Egyptians. Because in the first pasuk, and we're in Perek Nun of Sefer Bereshis pasuk Zayin, it says, Vayal Yosef likbaras aviv. So Yosef is mentioned first, and then Vayalui to kol avdei Paro, and the servants of Paro are mentioned second, Vahadar, and finally it says V'chol beis Yosef the echav hu beis aviv. So that's initially, but then if we fast forward to pasuk Yudalid, then it says Ma'ishal basof t'chsiv vayoshav Yosef Mitzrayim hu v'echav. And the brothers of Yosef are mentioned right after Yosef. V'hadar, and only afterwards, v'chola olim ito likbars aviv, a reference to the Egyptians, who are now number 3 on the list. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, to explain and reconcile this apparent contradiction, b'tchila, initially, ad shelo ro b'chvodam shel Yisrael, before the Egyptians became aware of the honor that was rendered to Yaakov Avinu at his funeral, lo nagu b'hem kavod. They didn't treat Yaakov's descendants with respect. Well, b'sof shelo b'chvodam, as we're going to soon see, that with this funeral, they began to appreciate the honor of Yaakov and his descendants, nagu b'hem kavod, and then they paid respect to the brothers of Yosef, and allowed, of course, the brothers of Yosef to go first. The Chsiv, as the Torah alludes to, in this pasuk Yud actually, it says Vayavo ad Goren Hatad. They came to Goren Hatad, the threshing floor of the thorn. So what's the deeper meaning of this name? B'chi Goren Yeshlo Latad? Is it possible that there's a threshing floor for thorns? No one harvests thorns and then threshes them. This is a symbolic pasuk. Omar Rabbi Avavo, Malavit Shekifu Ksarim Larono Shel Yaakov. That the kings took off their crowns and they surrounded Yaakov's coffin with their crowns. Kigoren Zeh Shemakifa Lo Atad. And it had the appearance, it was similar to a threshing floor that people surround with thorn bushes as a security measure. Shabo b'nei Esav b'nei Yishmael b'nei Keturah, the descendants of Esav and of Yishmael and of Keturah, they all came there. And Tana Kulam l'Milchama Bo, they all were prepared for battle. They wanted initially to prevent Yaakov from being buried in Ma'ora Samachpelah. But Kevin Sharo Kisro Shal Yosef, Toli Barono Shal Yaakov, once they saw that Yosef's crown was hanging on Yaakov's coffin, Notlu Kulam Kisreim, they all took off the crowns, Uslaum Barono Shal Yaakov, they hung them on Yaakov's coffin. And how many were there? Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Shloshim Veshisha Ksarim Nislu Biarono Shal Yaakov. So it seems that since Yosef was the viceroy of the superpower of that time, and yet he abnegated himself toward his father, that awakened the realization of Yaakov's stature in the hearts of these kings. They surrounded his coffin with their crowns, as if to say, just as a threshing facility and its hedge of thorns exist only for the sake of the wheat produced there, so too the entire world existed only for the sake of Yaakov. They recognized at that moment that despite their kingdoms and their armies, they were merely a peripheral aspect of creation, a collection of thorns, while Yaakov was the essence of creation. Now Rashi accounts for 36 crowns, but the Mefarshim have a lot of problems with this Rashi. Rashi has one crown that belonged to Yosef, and then if you add another 12 crowns that belong to the 12 princes of Yishmael, and then 23 crowns that belong to the chiefs of Esav. And Tosfos raises the objection that according to Rashi's own interpretation in Divrei Yomim, the second list of the chiefs of Esav refers to persons who first reigned many years after Yaakov's funeral. And the Tosfos Shantz makes note of the fact that Rashi's count does not include any rulers from Keturah. Our Gemara mentions the descendants of Keturah that also came. Okay, that's an issue, but we should mention the Karen Ora's insight that the 36 crowns correspond to 36 krisos, that are sins that are so severe they cut off a person from the divine source. And when a person does the opposite of this, he cleaves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, partakes of the splendor of the divine presence, then he has a crown upon his head. Vayispedu sham mispaid gadol v'kavid ma'od. Pasuk testifies that there was held a very great and imposing eulogy. Tanan Abraisel teaches us that the mourning, the grief was so intense that afilu susim v'chamorim, even horses and even donkeys started making sounds, moans, neighs, indicating their mourning. Kevan Shigia, he says that perhaps these animals were robed in black, as was customary for royal funerals at that time. And this was all done to demonstrate the grief over the royal personage's demise, how great the grief was, as if to say the horses themselves are crying. So they're about to bury Yaakov Avinu in the Moras Hamapela. He would be the fourth, together with his wife Leah, the fourth of the Zugos that are buried in Kiryas Arba. And Esav says, no, I want that burial plot for myself. Also, Esav Kama Akev, he's putting up barriers to prevent the burial of Yaakov Amalem, and he says to them, Mamre, Kiryas Arbu, Hebron. This is Mamre in the city of the four, which is Hebron. And this is called the city of four because this burial cave has place for only four pairs of people. Yom Rab Yitzchak, Kiryas Arba Zugos Hoyu, Adam V'Chava, Avram V'Sara, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. So here's Esav's argument. There were two spaces left after the burial of Adam V'Chava, Avram V'Sara, Yitzchak and Rivka. So what's left are two spaces, two Makomos Kvura. I get one and he gets one, but he buried Leah there. By the Feresh Didehu. So there's only one burial place that's remaining, and you're not allowed to bury Yaakov there because it's my space. Amru leis vinte. So the Jewish people said to Esav, you sold it. In other words, when Esav asked for a pot of lentils, halitedi la, he sold his rights. Amalahu, Esav said, what are you talking about? Nehidus abini becherusa. Even though I gave up and sold my extra portion as a bachar, but pshitusa mizavni, I still get the equal share with my brother Yaakov. I never sold the standard portion that I received simply as a son. In. You sold also your standard portion. You have nothing in the Maras HaMachpelah. Dichsiv, b'kivri asher karisi li. Behold, I'm about to die, and in my grave, which I've acquired, karisi, I've acquired for myself, that you bury me. According to the Medrash, Yaakov took all the silver and gold that he had received from the house of Lavan, made a heap out of them, and he said to Esav, what do you prefer? You want this heap or the graveside in Kiryas Arba? And Esav chose the heap of silver and gold. The word kira in this context means selling, mechira. Shekain, the karchei hayam, in cities on the sea, korin lemechira kira. Selling is called by the word kira. Amalahu. Esav says, I don't recognize such a mechira. Havuli garta. Show me a some sort of a document to prove that I sold you even my chelik pshitusa. Amrulay, they said, Igarta bi'ara de Mitzrayim. The letter of sale, the bill of sale, is back in the land of Egypt. Uman Nazil. We have to tell someone to go fetch it. Nazil Naftali. Dekal be ki ayalta. Naftali is swift as an ayelet. V'chsiv Naftali ayola shlucha. Hanosein imre shefer. The live is beautiful sayings. Amar Rabbi Avo al tikri mishefer el imre sefer. Naphtali is the one who will deliver the document that contains the legal statements proving that Yaakov had purchased those two kfar. Chushin braided Don Tamanava. Chushin, who was hard of hearing, the son of Dan, Yakira Le Udne, Amalei, my high, what is going on over here? Why aren't they burying my grandfather Yaakov? Amrule Kama Akve Hai. This one, meaning Esav, is blocking, he's preventing us from burying Yaakov. Adi Yossi Naphtali Me'arad Mitzrayim. Naphtali is still not returned from the land of Egypt with the proof of ownership of the cave. Amar Lahu, the Ada Ossi Naphtali Me'arad Mitzrayim Avi Abba Mutal B'Vizoya. I'm not going to tolerate this situation that we have to wait until Naphtali flies back from Egypt. And in the meantime, my grandfather's lying here in disgrace. Shakal Kulpa. So Hushim took a hold of a staff and Machye Aresha, and he hit Esav on the head, and Esav died. Nasran Eine, the eyes of Esav's corpse fell out, bin Nafla Karad Yaakov, and they fell on the feet of Yaakov. And this is a punishment because Leah's eyes almost popped out because she was crying, because she thought she'd have to marry this Rosh Esau. Paschinu Yaakov li einei ve'echir. Yaakov opened his eyes and he smiled. A pasuk in Tehillim, the righteous one will rejoice when he sees vengeance. Pa'amav yirchatz b'dam harosha. He shall bathe his feet in the blood of the wicked one. V'yoseh shon is kaimenuvu asa shall Rivka tichsiv, as Rivka had stated, lama eshkal gam shnechem yom echad. Why should I be bereaved of both of you on the same day? Even though they didn't die on the same day, but their burials were on the same day. Now the Gemara wants to know now, why do we attribute the burial of Yaakov to Yosef? And if Yosef had not stood up and buried his father Yaakov, wouldn't the brothers bury their father Yaakov? And the pasuk itself testifies that it was the Achim, it was Banav, who carried the bones of Yaakov to be buried in Maras Machpelah. Amr the Gemara answers, Hanichu lo. The brother said, let Yosef take the leading role in the burial. Kvodo b'malachim Yosef ibed Yotos. There'll be a greater kavod, a greater honor for Yaakov if royalty would bury him rather than commoners. Mi lanu gadol Yosef, who was greater than Yosef and would attend to the burial of Yosef. Yosef attended to the burial of his father. Now, Mida Keneged Mida, some great person will attend to the burial of Yosef, and that's going to be none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbana Borei Kama Chavivos Mitzvos Al Moshe Rabbeinu. See how mitzvos are so beloved to Moshe Rabbeinu. Called Yisrael Kulam Nisasku Bebiza. The whole Jewish people, the population, were engaged in gathering the booty of Egypt. Who and where was Moshe? Nisasik b'mitzvos. He was involved in mitzvos. Shenemar chacham lev yikach mitzvos. And specifically, the mitzvah of Kvuras Yosef. Frekti Gemara minayin hoyodea Moshe Rabbeinu heichan Yosef. How did Moshe Rabbeinu know to locate the burial place of Yosef? How did Moshe know that? Amru. There was an old lady. Serach bas Osher. Nishtairami Osada. For the generation of the children of Yaakov, the daughter of Asher by the name of Serach was still alive. She was 210 years old. And she was one of the 70 nefashos sheyardu Mitzrayim with Yaakov. Halach Moshe Etzla. Moshe goes to consult with Serach. Chlumat Yodas Heichon Yosef Kover. Do you know by chance where Yosef is buried? Omru Le Aron Shal Matechas Asulo Mitzrayim. He's buried by the Egyptians in a metal coffin. Ukavu b'Nailus Hanor, and it was set in the Nile River. Kedeshis Barchu Mema. So that the waters should be plentiful and irrigate all the fields. Holach Moshe v'yomer al Sfas Nailus. So now that Moshe Rabbeinu got the tip from Serach, and that is that the Aron of Yosef is Mateches, and it's in the Nile River. And all this is, why did the Egyptians do that? Kadesh Yisbarchu Meimav. Holach Moshe v'yomer al Sfas Nailus Amar Lo. He declared Yosef, Yosef. Higia Eisha Nishba Kodesh Baruch Hu Shani Goel Eschem. God says, the moment has arrived to fulfill my oath that I will redeem you. Higia Hashvua Sheshbata Es Yisrael. The time for the fulfillment of the oath that you made, and that you made the Jewish people swear to take your bones with them, has arrived. If you'll show yourself, that's well, that's good. Im lav, but you don't show yourself, we are absolved of the obligation to fulfill your oath. Miyad Sof Arono Shel Yosef. The coffin of Yosef floated to the sea. Yal Tisma Heich Barzel Sof. You'll ask me, how could iron float to the top? And there's a precedent for this. Sharik Siv in Malachim Beis, it says, with regard to Elisha, Vayhi Echad is one of the attendants of Elisha, Mapil Akora Ves Barzel Nafal Amayim. Right, Mapil Achora, he was bringing down a beam. Vesabarzel, and the iron axe head fell into the water. And this young fellow cried out, Aha, Adoni v'hu shol, I have to return it to my master. Vayomer el ish Elohim, Ana nafal. Where did it fall? Vayar'ewas hamakom. Vayiktzav eitz. Vayashlech shama. Vayatzaf habarzel. Elisha cuts off a piece of wood, threw it there, and the iron floated up. Valo dvar kal v'chom. Uma Elisha talmido shel Eliyahu. Eliyahu talmido shel Moshe. Right, Eliyahu passes on the tradition of Moshe. Is saf barzel mipanov. The iron floats on account of Elisha. Mipnei Moshe Rabbeinu alachas kam v'kama. How much more so would it float, the iron coffin for Moshe Rabbeinu? Rabbi Nosson Omer b'karbonit shel malachim hayakovu. Yosef was buried not underground, but in a catacomb, which means above the surface of the ground. And these are tombs of kings. So it's above the ground. Holach Moshe v'yomer al karbonit shel malachim. He stood next to the royal catacombs. Omer declared Yosef, Higia eish nishbal kodesh baruch hu shani goel eschem. Higia shvua sheishbata es Yisrael. Im atomar atzmecha muta. V'im lav hareinu anu menukim mishvuascha. Yosef Shon is the Zeh Arono Shel Yosef. The coffin of Yosef trembled, and he could distinguish it from all the other coffins. Notlo Moshe ve'vio etzlo. And Moshe took it and brought him with him. Chalosim shonim shal Yisrael b'midbar hayushnei aronos halol echad shel mes. One of them was Yosef, the echad shel Shechina, and one was the divine presence, meaning the Aron with the shtei luchos habris, the holy ark. Mahalchim said they would travel together. By over in the Shavim Omrim, Ma tivo shel shnei aronos halol. What's the nature of these two caskets? Amru. Echad shel mes, echad shel Shechina. One belongs to a dead man, and the other belongs to the divine presence. V'chima darko shel mes ha'alchet shel Shechina. Is it normal for the dead man to travel with the divine presence? Amru. Here we turn to the Yud Gimel Beis. Kim zeh kol mashe kosu bazeh. The contents of this one, of this coffin in the Yosef, fulfilled everything that's written in the contents of this one on the Shtei Luchos Habris in the Aron.